Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Cultured Pull List. In this week's episode, we are covering the Invincible comic series, both volumes 3 and 4. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Hello, everyone. This is the Cultured Pull List. We talk about all things comics, news, review books, and talk about some other books we're reading besides our main topic of the week. So, yeah, Invincible Season 2 has finally returned. Took like a 3 or 4 month hiatus,
Yeah.
at least. And yeah, now it's finally back. I've seen half the new episode, but yeah, it feels like it's almost a new season. It's been so long since part 1 and 2. I'm almost like forgetting some of the first half of season 2. But yeah, so we are continuing our coverage of the Invincible comic series. We started we did the first 8 issues or so when season 2 first premiered in like October, I think,
Yeah.
September, October. So yeah, check out that episode if you have not seen it and want to see our coverage on that. But yeah, so before we get into our Invincible books this week, I did just want to mention a little bit of news. It's nothing too huge, really, but Marvel recently announced a bunch of new X-Men comics they're relaunching. I believe it's this coming summer. So like right now they're doing this big thing, the Fall of X, and it's like the culmination of this long arc they've been doing with the X-Men. But I guess once they're done that, they are relaunching not one but 3 new X-Men titles. There's going to be the Uncanny X-Men, which is written by Gail Simone and David Marquez. X-Men by Jed MacKay and Ryan Stegman. And then Exceptional X-Men by Eve L. Ewing and Carmen Carnero. And oh yeah, this whole relaunch is called From the Ashes. And each of these series, I guess, is kind of taking one aspect of the X-Men and just kind of fleshing it out into one series. So the X-Men series is going to be more like the official well-funded and backed like X-Men team led by Cyclops, and the team is also going to be comprised of Beast, Magneto, Psylocke, Kid Omega, Temper, Magic, and Juggernaut. Then the Uncanny X-Men is going to be more like renegade outlaw heroes doing kind of, kind of under the table type missions. And this is going to be comprised of Rogue, Gambit, Nightcrawler, Jubilee, and Wolverine. And frankly, I think that series looks most interesting to me just from the lineup.
Yeah, for sure.
And just kind of the concept of, they're more like under the radar, like outlaws. And then there's the Exceptional X-Men, which is more taking on, I guess, the like teaching and school aspect, because Emma Frost and Kitty Pryde are going to be training 3 young New Mutants. And that's going to be Exceptional X-Men. But there's also going to be some other series. So yeah, so these 3 starting in so X-Men is the first one that's coming out. That's starting on July 7th, or sorry, July 10th. And then Uncanny X-Men is coming on August 7th. And then Exceptional X-Men is premiering on September 4th. And then after that, throughout the rest of the year, they are going to be reintroducing some other titles. There's going to be Phoenix, X-Factor, Storm, Nyx, X-Force, and Wolverine. And frankly, it seems like a bit much, but but at the same time, I feel like like at least half of these comics are already going already. So like I guess they're just gonna be like rebooting them, kind of.
Okay.
But yeah, so it definitely seems like they're They have some ambitious plans for the X-Men characters, but yeah, thought that was interesting. This news, like they've been kind of teasing like the From the Ashes for the last few months.
Yeah.
But this is the official. This is dropped yesterday. This official
Okay.
layout of what they're doing. So, but yeah, that is all the news I had. Did you have anything?
No, I didn't have any comic news this week.
All right, cool. Let's get into our book here. All right, so we are covering Invincible, both Volume 3 and 4. So, Volume 3 is titled Perfect Strangers. Volume 4 is titled Head of the Class, and this covers issues 9 through 19. The writer is Robert Kirkman, art by Ryan Ottley, inks by Ryan Ottley. Bill Crabtree is the colorist, and letters by Robert Kirkman and Russ Wooten. All right, so picking up where we left off in issue 8 and 9, Omni-Man had killed the Guardians of the Globe, and the Mauler twins had unearthed the Immortal's body, and we're planning on doing something. We're not sure as of yet what they're planning on doing. Now, this first issue, issue 9, opens up, and this isn't like super important, I guess, besides we're reintroduced to Alan the alien, and he's on his way to Earth, seems like, and there's this obvious spoof of Star Trek: The Next Generation here, but like they're aliens, they're not humans. But I just thought, as a somewhat of a Next Generation fan, I thought that was pretty funny. So whoops, that was too much. There we go. So next we see Robot. He is being tasked by Cecil to oversee a formation of a new Guardians of the Globe team. And then we see Omni-Man off by himself in the mountains somewhere, and he's practicing saying some speech to Mark. And I mean, I think if you are familiar with the cartoon or the comics, you probably know what that is. So then we see Mark in Invincible and Adam Eve finishing up dealing with the Lizard League, which I'm pretty sure is supposed to be like a spoof of the Serpent Society from Marvel. But what I find really funny about these comics is it is like kind of obviously it's similar to The Boys in that a lot of the characters are spoofs of like Marvel or DC characters. But they obviously put their own spin on it. But so Adam, Eve, and Invincible are done messing with the Lizard League. Then Robot shows up and says he's holding tryouts for the new Guardians, and he'd like Adam, Eve, and Invincible to show up. But Adam Eve said she's not interested, and Mark says that he's pretty busy to join the team, but he'd like to come to the tryouts and see who's there and everything. So at the tryouts, we have a whole cast of characters, including Rexplode and Monster Girl, and Rexplode and Monster Girl get into a bit of a row, but Invincible breaks them up. And then we see Robot. He has gone through all the tryouts for everybody, and he has decided on the roster for the new Guardians of the Globe. So first we have Duplicate, then Shrinking Ray, Monster Girl, Black Samson, and Rexplode. And after the announcement, Robot talks to Invincible and says they'd still like him on the team. And Invincible reiterates that he's too busy, but he'll help if he can. Then we see Mark. He's hanging out with Amber in his room. They're studying, but they're obviously doing a little more than studying. And Adam Eve sees that. She was there to talk to Mark, but she seems kind of upset that to see Mark and Amber smooching there. So then we see the Mauler twins with the Immortal's body, and we see that they were planning on reanimating him, which they succeed in doing, but he's not as docile as they were planning on him being, and he ends up just freaking out and flying away. Next, we see Invincible fighting Doc Seismic, and who is attacking Mount Rushmore, but after a little bit of a fight, Invincible is able to get rid of him pretty quickly. Late that evening, Mark is up out of bed to get some water, and his dad sees him and tries to tell him what's been on his mind, but Mark just kind of blows him off and thinks he's trying to like give him the sex talk or something. So he just says he needs to get up early, so he needs to go back to bed. Next we see Damien Darkblood, who is still working on the murder case of the Guardians of the Globe, and he returns back to the murder scene because he feels like he might have missed some stuff. Then we also see Black Samson visiting his butler, who was revealed to be a villain in the last several issues. Come on. Yeah, so then we see Mark going to his favorite comic shop after school, and he sees like a whole line of people, and he asks somebody what's going on, and apparently the creator of his favorite comic Science Dog is there at the comic shop signing books. So using his super speed, he runs home and grabs his comic collection. And this is honestly one of my favorite parts.
Yeah, it's my favorite thing ever. Yeah.
It's this really great meta thing where so he's asking the creator of Science Dog like questions about like his process and everything and how he does it, and the guy says like, oh, you know, sometimes I'll just reuse art that I've already done for over and over. It's good for dramatic pauses and when stuff doesn't really change from panel to panel. And then we just so blatantly see like the reuse of art like in these 3 panels and then the next 3 as well. It's great. And Mark is like, don't you think that's kind of cheap? And he's like, not really. That was, yes, quite good. So next we see Omni-Man dealing with this weird squid monster thing, and Mark sees it on the TV and decides to go help. But as Omni-Man is dealing with the squid monster, the Immortal shows up and tries to get revenge for Omni-Man killing the Guardians. And Omni-Man pretty easily kills Immortal yet again. And he does this right as Mark shows up. So Mark sees the whole thing. So Omni-Man decides it's as good a time as any to tell Mark the truth. And it turns out that the Viltrumites, Omni-Man's race of people, aren't quite as benevolent as he had made Mark and everyone else he told about his heritage believe. Turns out their society is very ruthless and brutal, kind of just they've amassed like a race of genetically perfect individuals by slaughtering all the weak in their society. And after they built a what they consider a utopia, they decided to spread their superior technology and system of governance to other planets. So they basically just start a campaign of conquering a bunch of other planets, and Omni-Man is a part of that, and he ends up rising through the ranks and commanding a bit of like a squad of his own, and he leads a lot of missions to other planets, including on the aliens planet. So we see that he kind of massacred his planet because they try to assimilate the planets, but if they resist, then they just pretty much wipe them out. But eventually the Viltrumites get spread so thin that they decide to start a program where they just send one Viltrumite per planet to go to the planet, and they basically have control of the planet to do what they want for 500 years, but they're supposed to kind of slowly weaken the planet and prepare it to be taken over. So Omni-Man gets sent to Earth, and it takes him a while to adjust to Earth, but he starts going around kind of playing the superhero, saving people. And during one of those times, he meets Debbie, Mark's mom, and he slowly acclimates to a bunch of different stuff on Earth that were foreign to him, including working for a living and uh, being able to have sex besides just in the context of procreation, which he enjoys. And he just continues to be a superhero, and eventually he meets the Guardians of the Globe and starts a family with Debbie. And he admits to Mark that he is enjoying his life, even though he knows it's not going to last, and he's like grown fond of his wife. But as soon as Mark's powers started to develop, Omni-Man knew that he didn't really have much time left. So he decided to start weakening the Earth's defenses, starting with killing the Guardians of the Globe, their greatest heroes. And yeah, then he tells Mark that now Mark needs to join him, and together they'll take over the world, and they'll still have like a long time to do what they want with Earth before they have to hand it over to the Viltrumites. But Mark obviously is not quite happy about this, and kind of yells at his dad about it. And through that interaction, his dad kind of says that Mark's mom was little more than a pet to him because of how long his lifespan is and how like superior Viltrumites are to humans. They're basically, so, and that definitely doesn't sit well with Mark. And he says he's going to stop his dad, but Omni-Man doesn't take that lying down, and they begin to fight. And the fight goes through the city, causing a lot of destruction, and it just kind of keeps going and keeps going and keeps causing a lot of destruction. And Mark's able to get a few good licks in, but it's mostly a one-sided fight. Omni-Man just kind of beating the crap out of Mark. Through their fight, he does say, like, he does try to convince him, saying like, our lifespan is so long. Do you really want to just see everything you love and everyone you love like die? And kind of tries to convince Mark of their superiority to humanity, but Mark isn't having it. Eventually, Omni-Man takes Mark out and up into the air, smacks him around, and throws him into a mountain. And then we have this really powerful line that's right in this, ripped right out of this in the animated series, where Omni-Man asks Mark, like, after 500 years, what will you have? And Mark says, "You, Dad. I'd still have you." And after that, Omni-Man is visibly conflicted, and he ends up just flying out into space, and we see him crying like a bitch. No, I'm kidding, but he is flying off, and does is visibly upset. And next we see that Mark has been found by Cecil's men, and they've taken him to a top secret government hospital to recover. And we see the world kind of reeling from what Omni-Man did, and like all his friends and Mark's friends dealing with his absence. So after about 2 weeks, Mark wakes up, and Cecil tries to introduce himself and explain to Mark what's going on, but Mark is kind of too overwhelmed to process it. So Cecil decides to come back later. And then we see William and Adam Eve both trying to visit Mark, but he's not there, and neither is his mom. And Adam, Eve, and William end up seeing each other there at Mark's house and end up hanging out together. So then we see Cecil talking to Debbie, Mark's mom, saying that he's pulled some strings to make sure everything's taken care of for them, that they'll get money, that they'll get royalties from Mark's dad's books, Omni-Man's books. He was an author, and they're now that they've basically said that Nolan, his alter ego, his secret identity, died during the fight between Omni-Man and Invincible, and so now his books are selling even more than they were. So Mark and his mom are getting all the money, but Cecil just making sure that they're taken care of. Then we see Adam Eve going to talk to Robot, asking Robot if he knows anything about where Mark is, because nobody's told them what happened after the big fight. And Robot goes to the Pentagon and asks basically the liaison, I think his name is Donald. He's like the liaison between Cecil and the superheroes. So Robot asks Donald where Mark is, and he says that they have him at their facility and they're taking care of him and he's recovering. So when Mark is strong enough and able to process everything, Cecil comes back and tells him what happened, tells him that they're taking care of them, but also says that he worked directly with his dad, and he's kind of hoping that Mark will pick up where his dad left off and work with Cecil. And he also shows him this like room and kind of explains this thing where like there's a chemical in drinking water that inhibits people from seeing certain wavelengths of light, and that's how the government is secretly able to do things and make it pretty much invisible. But in this lab, like for a second, he lets the special lights turn off, and we see that the government is once again bringing the immortal back to life. But Cecil gives Mark a communication device and a pager and is like, yeah, I'll page you when I need your help. So then Mark and his mom go home, but they're not home for very long before Mark gets a uh, beep on his pager. And so he gets sent off by Cecil to deal with a threat, but it turns out to just be Alan the alien. They tussle for a second, but then they get to talking, and Alan reveals that he's come back to warn uh Invincible that there's a Viltrumite on his planet. Because he went, because last we saw him, it turned out that he was supposed to be sent to Urath, not Hearth. So he goes back to the coalition of planets and you know tells them the mistake. And once they hear that he went to Earth, they're like, "Oh, Earth's like on the no-fly list because it's a Viltrumite there." And then Invincible explains to him, "Yeah, I kind of know that because he's my dad." And then they kind of have a talk, and yeah, they're kind of chummy with each other. So next we see the Guardians of the Globe, the new Guardians of the Globe, and Invincible and Adam Eve fighting those quickly aging aliens that we saw in like the first few issues of the series. And this time they are able to survive for hours without aging at all. And then like this king guy, the obvious leader, kind of does a villain monologue explaining all about how they studied Omni-Man when he was marooned on their planet, and they figured out how to deal with the aging symptoms. And it turns out there's like these little bracelets they're wearing. But as he's explaining this, Rexplo just destroys the um, his wristband, which causes him to immediately start aging. And then the other Guardians start targeting the wristbands as well, and just cause the aliens to retreat. Later that night, Invincible is heading back home, and he's confronted by the Immortal, who says to him that he doesn't trust him because of his father, and he's going to keep his eye on him. And once Mark goes inside his room, Cecil talks to him and explains that I forgot to mention this earlier, but Cecil told Mark that um, they had recorded everything his dad said, because his dad was wearing his earpiece that connects to Cecil, and they were able to hear everything he said. And he played it for Mark's mom, so his mom knows everything that Mark knows. But now in this scene, Cecil is explaining to Mark that somehow that recording got leaked, and it's going to be on the news like the next day. And Cecil is confident that it's not going to reveal Mark's secret identity, but like at the same time, it's kind of not going to be a pleasant experience. And as Cecil leaves, he explains that he's just going to teleport away. And he says something like it costs taxpayers $5 million every time he uses it. But yeah, but he's still obviously pretty excited to use it. So then Mark goes downstairs and sees his mom watching the TV, and the recording is already playing on the news. But then Art, their family friend, shows up. He is the one that made Invincible and Omni-Man's super suits, but he shows up and he's brought whiskey to share with Mark's mom, and that's becomes a little more important later. So the next day, Mark goes back to school, and he talks with William and Adam Eve, and they reveal that they started dating while Mark was recovering from his injuries. And then Mark is reunited with his girlfriend Amber, but um, he kind of blows her off. She wants to hang out more, and he's like, "Yeah, I gotta go hang out with my mom and make sure she's okay." And Mark also talks to his principal, and his principal makes it clear that they're gonna make sure he has the time to make up the homework he missed before graduation, which is pretty soon. Then we see that um, the higher ups aren't very happy with the response time of the Guardians of the Globe, and their efficiency isn't quite up to par. So Cecil ends up adding the Immortal and Bulletproof to the roster as well to kind of add some more muscle and speed. Um, and then we see that as he's leaving the oh yeah, and he also gets the original Guardians of the Globe. He gets access to their hideout, their base of operations. And as he and Donald are leaving, Cecil uh, uses the teleporter again, and Donald's like, "Sir, that's really expensive. Are you sure you want to keep using that?" He's like, "Donald, I know, but I think I'm addicted to it." And then he just teleports away. Then the later that night, we see uh, Invincible Mark go home, and his mom's kind of almost passed out on the floor drunk, and she, in her drunken stupor, she kind of blames Mark for chasing his dad away, and asks him like, why did you fight him? And that is the end of that half.
My half opens up with Monster Girl and Robot. Robot's taking her aside to be like, "Hey, can you please stop flirting with Bulletproof? He doesn't appreciate it, and also you're kind of a kid, so it's a little weird." And
Yeah.
she goes off on him about like, because she basically has Benjamin Button syndrome, where she's
Yeah.
aging backwards, and so she's like, "I only have a couple more years of this before I'm like I have to retire because I'm gonna be a baby." And then it's like, "Oh, he didn't know about that," so he's like. So then he like pricks her with a needle, and he's like, "Well, I'll look at your DNA and I'll see if I can see anything about your condition." Here's another shot of him, not a shot, another panel of him checking out his, not checking out his mom, checking in on his mom.
Yeah.
That'd be weird.
Hopefully not. Yeah, it'd be kind of weird.
And then another one with Amber. One thing that I think that this does really well is I'm really invested in like the relationship between the characters. Like you
Yeah.
brought up in your half, uh, Eve and not Mark, but the other one,
William.
William, and then also Amber and Mark. I think they do that relationship stuff really well. But the main conflict of this issue is that during the fight between Omni-Man and Invincible, they went underwater and they accidentally killed the leader of, I don't think it's called Atlantis.
Well, their king was one of the members of
you're
the
right. You're right.
Guardians of the Globe, so
You're right. You're right.
Omni-Man murdered him with the others.
Yeah, that's right. And so the policy is that after the ruler of the city, Underwater City, dies, his offspring has to be married to the killer of the previous king. And so because Omni-Man's no longer there, it's brought to the next of kin. So now Invincible has to marry the dead king's daughter, or like they're gonna have war with the surface. And Cecil's like, "Listen, just go down there. We'll figure it out. But just play along with it for now." And they go down underwater, and Mark's mom is visiting the publisher of Nolan's books and talking with her about royalties and stuff like that. And that's when what's this guy's name?
Yeah, like I forget, it's like Super Patriot or something
Yeah,
like that.
exactly. That's when he comes by and it's revealed that publisher is actually married to a superhero. And then after the meeting, I don't have the panel. After the meeting, she pulls her aside and is like, "Hey, can we meet up?" Because the publisher doesn't yet know that Nolan was Omni-Man, but she does know that Nolan's obviously dead. So they just want to meet up to talk about that. And while we cut back to Mark underwater, and we're introduced to the queen to be and also her assistant, who's like really depressed. And
Yeah.
and then we cut to the so he's underwater with the assistant, and the assistant's kind of giving him the rundown of all the different protocols. And basically the ceremony consists of you have to fight this weird monster thing, and then you have to make love in front of everybody. And Mark's like, I don't know about that. And so yeah, that's the ceremony. And then during all that, actually no, so the assistant guy, he gets really upset and he leaves because he's like pretty visibly distraught. And after he leaves, Cecil beeps Mark with the pager, and Mark tells him that the marriage is going to happen in like 6 hours, and that Cecil's still trying to find like a legal loophole. So he basically has people that are going over like all of the laws about this fish society and trying to find some sort of like backdoor so that Mark doesn't have to actually do that. And the reason why Cecil beeped Mark was because the Mullet twins are out and about again, and then so instead of Invincible, they send the Immortal to stop them. Then we cut to the two women who are drinking coffee, and she then reveals to the publisher that Omni-Man was Nolan, and they kind of have a conversation about everything that's happening, all the personal stuff that's going on there. And then back underwater, the fish assistant reveals to Mark that he was actually really in love with the princess. And Mark's like, well, why don't you just marry her? And then he's like, well, I can't because there's all these rules and protocols. And then he's like, wait a minute, I have a plan. So they hatch this plan where Invincible, pretends to like run away from the fish monster, and then they're able to make it look like the assistant saves the day, and then the princess falls in love with him, and then they presumably do it, but we don't see it.
Thankfully.
Yeah, exactly. And Super Patriot was the guy's name.
Yeah.
And then the two women are meeting on the roof, and Mark stops by, and then Debbie tells Invincible that the publisher knows about the secret identity of Mark. And then now we find out that they Eve and William are talking about, because they both know earlier on it was revealed that they both independently knew that Mark was invincible, but they didn't know that each other knew.
Right.
So they're talking about that, and then Eve lets slip that she's a superhero too, and William didn't know that. So then he makes her fly around like that. And then the next issue starts with Invincible and Omni-Man presumably running around destroying New York. And we follow this guy, Angstrom is his name, and there's like this underground resistance led by the Immortal and Robot. And there's a part where Invincible and Omni-Man are able to track Angstrom to the underground base, and right before he's about to die, another version of Angstrom comes and pulls him through like a portal, and now he's in a different dimension. So we cut back to the main timeline. Mark in the Invincible, Adam, Eve, and the Guardians of the Globe are fighting off an alien invasion, and they basically are at a standstill until the aliens just randomly retreat, and they don't really know why. Cecil's pretty upset about this, so he goes to Donald, and he's basically like, we need to completely reevaluate the Guardians of the Globe situation because this just isn't working. And then we cut back to Mark and Debbie. Apparently the alien invasion we saw over here was so bad that it like destroyed most of the country, And so like the school is basically closed for like 5 weeks, and we can see this crater in their front yard. And so they go to the school to kind of survey the damage, and that's when Mark and Amber have their first reunion for like a while, because he's been dodging her for quite a bit. And then they also meet up with Eve and William as well. And then, excuse me, and then Cecil meets up with the Guardians of the Globe, and he's basically like, yeah, Robot, you're fired as the leader, but you can stay on the team if you want. From now on, Immortal is the leader. And as far as I can tell, the roster's still the same, but just they
Yeah.
shift the leadership dynamic a little bit. And then we get to the Pentagon, where this demon guy, I don't remember his name, but
Damien the Dark Blood.
yes, Damien Darkblood goes to Cecil's assistant, and he's like, I think I know who did the murders. And they're like, yeah, we know already.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay.
He's almost like a really useless character.
Yeah, exactly.
In these issues. I don't know if he's more important later, but
for sure. And then Invincible and Adam Eve are cleaning up some of the damage from the invasion, and they run into Titan, who is attempting to rob a bank, a jewelry store rather. And Mark like yells at him, and he's like, okay, I'll help you clean up the rubble instead. He's pretty copacetic about the whole thing. And we meet back up with Angstrom, who is with the main timeline, and then the one from the bad timeline are together, and he basically shows him this massive room of all the different angstroms, and then he basically is like, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I'm for just this narrative's sake. He basically says that the main one is the only one who can jump dimensions, but he's basically taking all of the ones, and he kind of hints that some of them come willingly and some of them don't. And so basically he's taking all of them, and he's kind of like absorbing their information, and trying to, because he can jump dimensions, but he doesn't know everything about every dimension, obviously. He's trying to build like this database of all these dimensions so he can travel more effectively. And then we cut to Mark and Amber, who are at the movies, and their date lasts for like half of the issue, so I'm going to skip over most of it. But basically, they're at the movies, and he doesn't tell her why he's been super busy, but they basically end up at his house again, and then they kiss, and then she leaves. And then we meet back up with the Moeller twins, who are kidnapped by Angstrom, and he makes a portal in their cell to a different dimension that was nuclear wasteland, pretty much, but the radiation levels are enough to be safe. And then because he can jump dimensions, but he's still like in the same like spot as he was in the other dimension, so he still like has to move the same amount of distance. He's just in a different spot, different dimension. So he walks over to the place where his car is in this dimension, and he teleports into his car, and they drive away. And they're back in school, and the teacher's like, basically like, yeah, you're not going to pay attention you just had a month and a half break, and then you're just 2 weeks left before you graduate, so we're going to watch Gladiator. Which, I mean, it's kind of a coincidence, but Ridley Scott showed up in the Kingsman comics, so bit of a connection there.
Oh yeah, that's true. I forgot about
that. Yeah, and then Mark's over here getting ready for his first, not his first day back. He's getting ready for graduation, and he's talking to his mom about how like being a superhero in college, like what's that going to be like. And during his graduation, he's called to help with I don't know what the group is called, but it's basically this business where superheroes can clock in, and they have like health insurance and stuff like that, where it's more like a job than something like the Guardians of the Globe is. And basically they have to fight this guy who at some point in the past, he was a scientist, and through some freak experiment, his girlfriend became immortal. And so he's like, well, I have to try to replicate that for myself. But instead, he just made this thing where his cells are just constantly growing and growing and growing. And then like that has like a toll on his brain. So he's just kind of this hulking monster. And I don't know all these superheroes' names, but there's one of them who's called like Commander Capitalism or something like that.
Yeah.
Very funny.
And he's the one that's currently dating the immortal girlfriend.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so basically, in order to stop him, Mark just like flies him up into the air until he's out of breath, and then that knocks him out. And then he makes it back in time because the principal was having like a 2-hour speech about how he's going to retire. And then when they throw the caps up in the air, he obviously goes super high. And the next issue starts out with this panel, which kind of reminiscent of the one with the Hulk from Secret Wars.
Oh yeah. When he's like holding up that whole mountain.
Yeah. And then we cut to Eve, William, and Amber at the burger place, and Amber's like, "I think Mark is on drugs," because they know he's a superhero, but she doesn't yet. And so he's like, "I think he's doing drugs or caught up in some gang stuff," and they're like, "That's not what's happening." And then right when Mark shows up to meet them at the burger place, he gets immediately called to the Pentagon, where Cecil's like, "You're going to accompany the astronauts on a mission to Mars because the Martians they're probably going to leave you alone, but they're not super friendly. So just in case they attack the astronauts, you need to be there to protect them." And we meet back up with these guys, which is pretty much what I told you before. But now the Moeller twins are going to kind of help them build some kind of device that kind of like controls the information from all the different dimensions. And now we meet Isotope, who's this green guy, Robot Head, I believe, who's like the big
Machine Head, I think.
Machine Head, who's like the biggest crime lord in the country. And then they're meeting with Titan, who works for Machine Head, and they're pretty upset because he was obviously seen working with superheroes, and so they're not super happy about that. And then they get to Mars, and immediately upon exiting the spacecraft, the Martians take the astronauts underground, and Mark flies there, and he's attacked by these kind of face hugger kind of things, but they're like smaller, and they attack him, but they don't do anything to him. And the Martians are kind of like, that's strange, because like 500 years ago, these weird little creatures landed on Mars, but they only attach to solid life forms. And because Martians can shapeshift, they can't really attach to the Martians. So they just kind of are like docile. And so the Martians kind of took advantage of that, and they kind of made them into like a servant race where they kind of just do whatever they want, do whatever the Martians want. And the issue with that is because the Martians were breeding them to become stronger and stronger so they can do more things for the Martians. But now that there's astronauts there who are solid life forms because they cannot change, they're afraid that I don't know what they're called, but the weird little face hugger guys.
Yeah, I forget what they're called too.
Are going to attach to the astronauts, and then they could like they could do some serious damage because they were breeded to be stronger.
Mm-hmm. They're called sequids.
Sequids. Yeah, thank you. And then like it pretty much just hard cuts to this, so we don't see the lead up to this. But
because they were gonna execute the astronauts.
Yeah, and then Mark just frees them somehow, and they escape to the astronaut. They escape to the spacecraft, and the lady astronaut's like, "I want to marry Invincible." And then there are two teases at the end of this issue where we see the sequids attached to one of the astronauts, and he has like a whole bunch of them crawling all over him. And then there's a Martian who snuck onto the spacecraft in the form of one of the astronauts. So he's now on Earth, just kind of as a human. So there's two cliffhangers there. And then we cut to William and Eve, and Eve's staying at William's house because his parents are away, and William's trying to get to sleep with Eve, and Eve's not really into that, and so they kind of break up. And then Mark and Amber are meeting up at a restaurant. She kind of confronts him about his drug issue, but he leaves pretty immediately. This now it's Titan was trying to get his attention, so he's just destroying buildings that are already marked for demolition. So he's not really doing any crime. He's just sort of being destructive and trying to get his attention. So he tells him about the situation with Machine Head, and so they decide to go in there and attack him. And obviously, Machine Head has a whole crew of supervillains. Over here is Battle Beast, Magnatac, and Kursk, Furnace, Magnamaniac, and the Tether Tyrant. Those are the supervillains working for the Machine Head. and they fight for a little bit, and they actually do a lot of damage, as you can see over here, a lot of damage to Mark and Titan. But the Guardians of the Globe are able to show up because Cecil was listening in through Mark's earpiece, and they do pretty quick damage. But Battle Beast is able to escape, and the Immortal captures Machine Head. Yeah, and so Mark is able to get out of that with minimal bruises, but the other superheroes are obviously not in as good a shape. And so Mark's story ends here with Amber is in his room, and she tells him that she broke up with William and that they need to talk, and that's how that ends. But then the final panels are Isotope, who's kind of monologuing to himself, and you think that, oh, maybe he's going to be the new crime boss, but then the final panel is Titan in a black suit, and so he's the new crime boss, and that's where we end.
Yeah. So yeah, now we have read almost 20 issues of Invincible. I think there's like 140 total or something like that. But yeah, so we've read not even a quarter. But yeah, what do you think of this second half of the Invincible books we've been reading?
I liked it a lot so far. It's a nice change of pace because the last couple of books we read are pretty dense.
Yeah.
And this one moves a lot quicker, but it's not to say it's bad. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I feel like these issues are better written and more interesting than the first like 8. I feel like the first 8 moved like really quick. These I feel like take their time a little more.
Yes.
But yeah, I think they're really good. The art's great. I mean, like I find it really interesting because I went into this kind of expecting it to be almost like exactly like the show.
Yeah.
Kind of just like a copy and paste of, I kind of expected the show to have been like a copy and paste of the comic. I think partially because they made the character designs so similar and even the animation style feels a lot like the artwork in this. But I think also because like there's some adaptations, like the animated movie adaptation of Batman Year One is literally just like a shot for shot, word for word adaptation of the graphic novel. So I kind of expected the comics to be more similar to the animated show, or I guess vice versa. But there's a lot more differences than I expected, which is cool because you don't know exactly what to expect. But it's similar enough. Like I honestly think I think the animated series is one of the most accurate like comic adaptations I've seen. I feel like the main differences they make are the order of events, because a lot of what happened in these issues, they happened after Nolan like betrayed everyone. But in the show, they happened before. And there is some stuff like we're introduced to Angstrom Levy, who is going to be like the main villain of this new season of Invincible. But so some of the stuff, and I think that storyline with like the fish lady that Mark had to marry was from this current season. But then there's other stuff that they're adapting that is for further down the line where Mark meets his dad again, all that stuff. So it seemed like they've really just like mixed things up a lot and put them in different orders and stuff. But I feel like the series also fleshes some things out a little more. Like, I feel like there's a lot more dialogue in the show, which I mean, it makes sense because they're like hour-long episodes.
Right.
And there's a lot more dialogue, and I feel build up between like Mark and his dad and Mark and his mom and everything. Also some character changes, like William is gay in the show, whereas I believe at some point in the comics he comes out as gay. I think, I'm not sure, but in this obviously he is not, because he's dating Adam Eve. And then I feel like the relationship between Mark and Amber is pretty different in the show. Not to mention Amber is pretty different, not just in appearance and everything, but I feel like in person, I feel like she's got a little bit more of a three-dimensional personality in the show, for better or for worse. But so and also they made some like minor changes, like Shrinking Ray is a woman in the animated show, or he's a man in the comic and stuff. And I think in the show, Bulletproof doesn't join the new Guardians until this current season, whereas he like is in the first roster in this. But yeah, I liked it. There was a lot of stuff I think that was familiar, and there was enough differences to kind of keep me engaged. And I feel like most of the characters are like pretty much exactly like the show, so they did a really good job in the show. But yeah, I'm glad we're reading these because
Yeah.
I didn't, I knew of Invincible before the animated series came out, but I
Right.
hadn't read anything
Yeah.
even after the first season came out. I hadn't read anything because I guess because like I said earlier, I kind of assumed it was exactly the same. But yeah, I'm looking for like I at some point since it does have a definitive ending, I kind of want to go and read like all 140 issues.
Yeah, for sure.
Since and they read really quick. They're
Yes.
pretty short issues. But I kind of like that because, like you said, we've been reading a lot of like dense books lately. That even like Kingdom Come was like 4 issues, but it was still like 200 something pages. I was like, oh yeah, it was a lot. So yeah, I definitely enjoy this. This is a nice kind of break from the heavier books, and yeah, just a very good story. And I really applaud Robert Kirkman not only for writing this, but being so like open to making changes because he has a he's an executive producer on the show, and I think he
Okay.
has some creative control, but he seems like pretty open to like making a lot of changes in the show. Whereas I feel like some creators would be more like butthurt about that.
For sure.
But yeah, so to wrap things up, let's do our cultured picks.
Let's do it.
For this week, I have two technically. They're the first 2 issues of the Rise of the Powers of X mini series that's going on with the X-Men. Kind of goes in line with what I was talking about earlier. But what's really notable about these issues is they are batshit crazy because they have like this. They deal with like the future and all these different timelines, and they even have a whole like timeline inside the book because there's basically like these different clones of Mr. Sinister, and each one of these clones has like a different timeline where they're in charge. And there's like one timeline where the X-Men defeat him, but then there's but then I think every time the X-Men win, Moira McTaggart, who apparently has like these time reset powers, just resets the timeline. And it's not even her, it's like a clone of her. Like she gets cloned, and like every time she resets the timeline, that clone dies or something. It's just like really crazy. Like it's nearly impossible to fully follow, but it's just kind of interesting how ridiculously like
Yeah.
complex it is. And there's like these different things outside of time, like the White Hot Room, and there's like Professor X and some a mutant group that are like outside of time. And then there's this giant like godlike being called Enigma, who I forget how he's connected to Mr. Sinister, but after the end of every timeline, he's always there because he just like destroys everything. And then the timeline gets reset. It's just freaking nuts, honestly. But kind of enjoyable though too. So and like I have no idea how it's supposed to connect to the main timeline because like all takes place in the future and other timelines and stuff. But I'm assuming at some point it's going to tie in with the current X-Men stuff. But yeah, what did you have this week?
This week I picked up Suicide Squad Dream Team #1, and the main character is Dreamer, who I believe appeared in one of the John Kent books. I'm not for sure.
Okay.
But basically, Amanda Waller has built this team, and she has them go to the island of Gamora, which, if you remember from,
what
was
wasn't that from the Authority?
Authority, yeah, the Authority.
Okay.
And it's closed off by this portal, so they travel through somebody's dream into the island. And what's interesting here is you kind of see like Amanda Waller's kind of being set up as like the big bad. We've talked about that before, but you kind of see like her ideology, because there's a flashback where she's talking to Dreamer about this politician who I can't describe for you two. I can't describe why he's bad, but he's a bad person.
Okay.
And Dreamer's like, why don't we just take him out? And then Amanda Waller's like, well, if we take him out, it's basically like whack-a-mole because there's just going to be another one that takes his place. But if we leave him in office, we can kind of like manipulate him and kind of change the system for the better. And so that's kind of like puts us into like her mindset about like, yeah, he's a bad person, but we can kind of manipulate it to our advantage kind of thing. So I thought that was really interesting. And yeah, it's a mini series that leads up to, as you can see on the screen, it leads to Absolute Power, which is the main event next summer. So
right. How does she like leverage Dreamer? Because Dreamer isn't a villain, is she?
Yeah. So Dreamer is from I don't know where she's from, but she's from some dimension or something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but Amanda Waller is like threatening to destroy that place. So I don't know if it's like actually placed on Earth or it's some different dimension. I'm not exactly sure. I don't know the details about Dreamer, but Amanda Waller is like, I'll destroy this place if you don't help me with this Suicide Squad. So
gotcha. Typical Waller fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Well, cool. Alrighty. Well, that ends our episode for this week. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, check out patreon.com/theculturednerd and look for our show's specific tier. Thank you to all the current Patreon supporters of The Cultured Nerd: Wesley H., Mitch S., Connor Y., Anna M., Oscar B., Craig L., and Salib K. Our logo and visual assets were designed by Jose Navarro. Our intro was designed by me. I have been your host, Michael Malillo. My co-host has been Luke S. Thanks again for joining us. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share. If you'd like to check out The Cultured Nerd on social media and the other YouTube channels, the other shows, all that, you can scan the QR code on the bottom left if you're watching this like on your TV or your computer or something. And if you'd like to check out Casual Experts, which is me and Luke's other brand, we talk, just all things nerdy and pop culture. We cover on our social media and YouTube and whatnot. You can scan the QR code on the bottom right.